In the heart of West Africa, where the land meets the sky in vast savannas and the earth holds treasures beneath its surface, a story unfolds that tests the resolve of a nation and its leader. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young president of Burkina Faso, has built his reputation on defending his country's sovereignty and natural resources from exploitation. When foreign miners orchestrate a sophisticated scheme to steal emeralds worth millions from a remote border region, it becomes more than just a crime. It becomes a threat to the very principles upon which his leadership stands. This is a story of courage, determination, and the fight to protect what belongs to the people. Before we dive into this incredible story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Chapter 1. The Discovery. The November sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty roads of Pama, a small town in southeastern Burkina Faso, less than 20 kilometers from the Niger border. The landscape was typical of the Sahel, scattered acacia trees dotting the golden-brown savanna, with occasional clusters of traditional round huts whose thatched roofs seemed to shimmer in the afternoon heat. For most residents of Pama, life revolved around subsistence farming and small-scale trade with their Nigerian neighbors across the border. But for Amadou Diallo, a local geological surveyor working for the Bureau of Mines and Geology of Burkina Faso, this particular Thursday afternoon would change everything. At 43 years old, Amadou had spent 2 decades studying the geological formations of his homeland, always believing that beneath the harsh terrain lay untapped wealth. His weathered face and calloused hands told the story of countless expeditions into remote areas, often under the scorching sun with minimal resources. Amadou was conducting a routine survey near the border when his equipment detected unusual readings. He knelt down, his worn boots sinking slightly into the reddish earth, and carefully brushed away layers of soil with his hands. What he saw made his heart race. The green glimmer was unmistakable. Emeralds, and not just traces. This was a significant deposit. He quickly documented the location with his GPS device and took several photographs with his phone. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Amadou knew he needed to report this immediately to the regional mining authority in Fada Ngourma, the capital of the Est region. As he packed his equipment into his battered Toyota pickup truck, he noticed something that made him pause. Fresh tire tracks, multiple vehicles, and they were recent, perhaps from earlier that same day. In this remote area, such activity was unusual. The tracks led eastward, toward the border. A knot of concern formed in his stomach. He had heard rumors of illegal mining operations in the region, but emeralds? This was unprecedented. Amadou drove back to Pama as the last light faded from the sky. The town's generator had kicked in, providing sporadic electricity to the main street, where a few shops remained open. He went directly to the local gendarmerie post, a modest concrete building with peeling yellow paint. Inside, Lieutenant Ouedraogo was finishing paperwork by the light of a kerosene lamp. The generator hadn't reached this part of town yet. After hearing Amadou's report, Lieutenant Ouedraogo's expression grew serious. He immediately placed a call to his superior in Fada Ngourma. Within the hour, orders came back: secure the site immediately and report directly to the regional command. This was no longer a routine matter. That night, as Amadou lay in his small room at the local guest house, he couldn't shake the image of those tire tracks. Someone else knew about the emeralds. Someone was already there. Chapter 2. The investigation begins. The following morning, a convoy of 3 military vehicles arrived in Pama. Major Sankara, a seasoned officer from the Burkina Faso Armed Forces, stepped out of the lead vehicle, his camouflage uniform crisp despite the early hour. At 51 years old, Major Sankara had served his country through various conflicts and understood the delicate balance of security in the border regions. Amadou met the convoy at the gendarmerie post and guided them to the discovery site. The drive took 40 minutes, mostly on unpaved roads that tested the vehicle's suspension. When they arrived, Major Sankara immediately noticed what Amadou had seen the previous day. The tire tracks were everywhere, and there were signs of recent excavation. The team secured a perimeter and began a thorough investigation. Captain Zongo, the unit's youngest officer, was tasked with documenting everything. He photographed the site from multiple angles, collected soil samples, and traced the vehicle tracks. The more they uncovered, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't accidental discovery, this was organized extraction. By midday, they found the first concrete evidence: discarded tools, foreign cigarette butts, and most damning of all, shipping documents partially burned but still readable. The papers indicated a company registered in Belgium with operations throughout West Africa. The destination listed on one fragment was Antwerp, the diamond capital of the world, where colored gemstones also commanded premium prices. Major Sankara radioed his findings to command in Ouagadougou. Within hours, the matter had reached the desk of the Minister of Mines, who understood the gravity immediately. If significant emerald deposits existed near the border and foreign entities were already extracting them illegally, Burkina Faso stood to lose millions, perhaps tens of millions, in revenue that rightfully belonged to the people. The minister made a decision that would change the course of events. He would brief President Traoré directly. This wasn't just about illegal mining, it was about sovereignty, about the very principles upon which the president had built his administration. Since taking office, Traoré had been clear about one thing above all else: Burkina Faso's natural resources belong to its people, not to foreign corporations or corrupt intermediaries. As the sun set on that Friday evening, a secure message was delivered to the presidential palace in Ouagadougou. President Traoré was in a meeting with his Security Council discussing the ongoing insurgency in the north when his chief of staff entered with the urgent communication. He read it twice, his expression hardening with each word. He looked up at his assembled advisers and spoke with the quiet intensity that had become his trademark. "Gentlemen, we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Our sovereignty is being violated and our resources are being stolen. We need to understand the full scope of this operation before we act, but when we do act, it must be decisive." He turned to Colonel Diarra, his national security advisor. "I want a complete intelligence assessment within 24 hours. Who are these people? How long have they been operating? How much have they already taken? And most importantly, who in our country is helping them?" Colonel Diarra nodded gravely. Everyone in the room understood the implication. Operations of this scale required local cooperation, which meant corruption at some level. That realization made the situation even more serious. President Traoré dismissed the meeting, but asked Colonel Diarra and the Minister of Mines to remain. Once the others had left, he spoke more freely. "This is exactly what we have been fighting against: the systematic exploitation of African resources by foreign interests, often with the complicity of our own people. We will not allow it to continue. Not in Burkina Faso. Not while I am president." Chapter 3. Traoré's decision. The weekend passed in a flurry of covert activity. Intelligence operatives fanned out across the Est region, gathering information, interviewing locals, and following leads. What they discovered painted a troubling picture of a sophisticated operation that had been running for at least 3 months, possibly longer. On Monday morning, President Traoré convened an emergency meeting in the secure conference room at the presidential palace. Present were Colonel Diarra, the Minister of Mines, the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Justice, and Major Sankara, who had been flown in from Fada Ngourma to provide first-hand testimony. Colonel Diarra presented the intelligence assessment. The operation was being run by a mining syndicate with connections to several European and Middle Eastern investors. They had entered the country on legitimate business visas, claiming to be consultants for agricultural development projects. In reality, they had been prospecting in the border regions, likely using local guides who knew the terrain. When they discovered the emerald deposit, they moved quickly. Equipment was brought in through Niger, avoiding Burkina Faso's official ports of entry. They employed a small team of experienced miners, mostly foreign nationals from countries with known gemstone expertise. The operation worked primarily at night, using portable equipment that could be quickly dismantled and hidden during daylight hours. The extracted emeralds were being smuggled across the border into Niger, then transported north through Algeria before reaching European markets. Based on the evidence gathered, intelligence estimated that at least $5 million worth of emeralds had already been extracted and smuggled out of the country. But the most damaging revelation came last. 2 mid-level officials in the regional mining office had been receiving bribes to overlook irregularities and delay any investigations. The corruption went deeper than anyone had initially suspected. President Traoré, listened to the entire briefing without interruption, his expression growing grimmer with each revelation. When Colonel Diarra finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, Traoré spoke, his voice measured but carrying unmistakable authority. What we are facing is not merely theft, it is a systematic violation of our sovereignty and a betrayal by those we trusted to protect our national interests. The question now is not whether we act, but how we act to ensure this never happens again. He stood and walked to the large map of Burkina Faso mounted on the wall, his eyes finding the Est region and the border with Niger. We must approach this strategically. If we move too quickly, the main actors will flee across the border where we cannot reach them. If we move too slowly, they will continue stealing from our people. He turned back to face the assembled officials. Here is what we will do. Major Sankara, you will return to the region immediately with additional forces. Your mission is surveillance only. I want to know every movement, every vehicle, every person involved in this operation. Do not engage. Do not alert them to our knowledge. Is that clear? Major Sankara stood and saluted. Yes, Mr. President. We will operate with complete discretion. Traoré nodded and turned to the Minister of Justice. Minister, I want arrest warrants prepared for all individuals we can identify, including the corrupt officials. But these warrants are to be sealed until I give the order to execute them. We coordinate everything simultaneously. No one gets advance warning. The Minister of Justice nodded and made notes on his tablet. Minister of Mines, Traoré continued, work with international law enforcement through Interpol. I want to know where these emeralds are going, who is buying them, and what legal mechanisms we have to recover our property. These criminals may escape our immediate jurisdiction, but they cannot hide from international law. He paused, letting his words sink in. This situation represents everything I have been fighting against since I took office. Foreign exploitation of African resources has impoverished our continent for centuries. It continues today in more sophisticated forms, but the result is the same. Our wealth flows outward while our people remain poor. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. We talk about economic independence, about keeping our resources for our development. But what do those words mean if we cannot protect what is ours? What do they mean if our own officials can be bought to betray their country? He looked at each person in the room. This is our moment to demonstrate that Burkina Faso is serious about sovereignty, that we will not be victimized by those who see Africa only as a source of cheap resources. We will act with precision, with justice, and with strength. Chapter 4. The Surveillance Operation. Major Sankara returned to the Est region that afternoon, with a specialized unit trained in covert operations. They established a base in an abandoned agricultural station 10 kilometers from the mining site, far enough to avoid detection, but close enough to respond quickly if needed. The team included surveillance specialists, communications experts, and a geologist who could assess the full extent of the emerald deposit. They worked in shifts, using night vision equipment and long-range cameras to monitor the illegal operation without being detected. What they observed over the next 5 days confirmed and exceeded the intelligence estimates. The foreign miners worked with military precision, operating primarily between midnight and 4 in the morning, when the risk of detection was lowest. They employed lookouts stationed at strategic points along the access routes, using encrypted radio communications to coordinate their movements. The operation's sophistication was impressive and troubling. They had portable crushing equipment, sorting tables, and even a small processing unit that allowed them to grade the emeralds on site. Only the highest quality stones were being transported out, leaving lower-grade material buried to avoid detection. This explained why the environmental impact had been minimal. They were careful to cover their tracks. Captain Zongo, serving as Major Sankara's deputy for this operation, was particularly struck by one observation. Every 3 days, a convoy of 3 land cruisers would arrive from Niger around 1 in the morning. The vehicles would be loaded with equipment and supplies on the way in, and loaded with sealed containers on the way out. The crossing point was not an official border post, but a remote area where the terrain made detection nearly impossible without dedicated surveillance. During one observation shift, Captain Zongo noticed something else. One of the vehicles bore diplomatic plates from Niger. This complicated matters significantly. Diplomatic immunity could shield the operation's organizers from prosecution, even if caught in the act. He reported this finding to Major Sankara, who immediately forwarded it to Ouagadougou. This information changed the dynamics entirely. The involvement of someone with diplomatic status suggested the operation had protection at a higher level, possibly involving corrupt officials in Niger as well. In Ouagadougou, President Traoré received this news during his daily security briefing. He sat back in his chair, processing the implications. If diplomatic personnel were involved, any confrontation could escalate into a diplomatic incident with Niger, Burkina Faso's neighbor and fellow member of the Alliance of Sahel States. He called for an immediate meeting with his foreign minister and the ambassador to Niger. The conversation was frank and difficult. Niger, like Burkina Faso, was dealing with insurgent violence and economic challenges. The alliance between the two countries was strategic and important, but sovereignty could not be negotiated away for diplomatic convenience. President Traoré made his position clear. We will inform Niger of what we have discovered and request their cooperation in stopping this operation. If they cooperate, we handle this quietly and maintain our alliance. If they do not, we proceed anyway, and let the diplomatic consequences fall where they may. The foreign minister, a seasoned diplomat who had served under previous administrations, was concerned about the potential fallout. Mr. President Wang, with respect, if we confront Niger publicly over this matter, it could damage our relationship at a time when we need regional solidarity against the insurgency. Traoré met his gaze steadily. Minister, I respect your experience and your concern, but I will not sacrifice our national interest for the appearance of solidarity. Real solidarity is based on mutual respect for sovereignty, not on tolerance for corruption. If Niger's leadership is unaware of this abuse, they will thank us for bringing it to their attention. If they are aware and complicit, then our alliance was already compromised. He paused, then continued in a softer tone. I understand your concerns about timing and regional relations. That is why we will approach this carefully. Ambassador, you will deliver a confidential briefing to your counterpart in Niamey, present our evidence and request their cooperation in identifying and apprehending the individuals using diplomatic cover for criminal activity. Give them 72 hours to respond. The ambassador nodded. And if they do not respond favorably, Mr. President, Traoré's expression hardened slightly. Then we proceed with the operation as planned, with or without their cooperation. Sovereignty is not negotiable. Chapter 5. The Diplomatic Gambit. The Burkinabe ambassador to Niger, Madame Fatou Keita, was a veteran diplomat known for her directness and integrity. She had served in various African capitals and understood the delicate dance of regional politics. On Wednesday morning, she requested an urgent meeting with Niger's Minister of Foreign Affairs. The meeting took place in Niamey at the ministry's headquarters, a modern building that stood in stark contrast to much of the surrounding city. Madame Keita brought with her a dossier containing photographs, intelligence reports, and evidence of the illegal mining operation. She presented everything with diplomatic courtesy, but unflinching honesty. The Nigerian foreign minister, a careful politician in his late 50s, reviewed the evidence with growing concern. He had not been aware of the operation, and the revelation that diplomatic plates were being misused clearly disturbed him. He promised to investigate immediately, and assured Madame Keita that Niger had no interest in facilitating illegal activities that harmed its neighbors. True to his word, within 24 hours, Niger's intelligence service had identified the diplomat involved, a junior consular official in Maradi who had been supplementing his modest salary by renting out his diplomatic vehicle to smugglers. He was immediately recalled to Niamey and suspended pending a full investigation. Niger's president was briefed on the situation, and recognizing both the seriousness of the matter and the potential damage to Niger-Burkina Faso relations, personally called President Traoré. The conversation was cordial but frank on both sides. Captain Traoré, the Nigerian president began, using the military rank that Traoré still preferred, I want you to know that my government had no knowledge of this operation. The moment your ambassador brought it to our attention, we acted. The individual who abused diplomatic privileges will face prosecution under our laws. Traoré appreciated the directness. Mr. President, I never doubted Niger's leadership or our alliance. Corruption is a cancer that affects all our nations. What matters is how we respond when we discover it. Your swift action demonstrates the strength of our partnership. They discussed cooperation for the upcoming operation. Niger agreed to position security forces on their side of the border to intercept anyone attempting to flee. They would also detain the foreign nationals already in their custody at the Maradi facility where confiscated smuggling vehicles were held. With diplomatic coordination secured, President Traoré gave the final authorization for the operation. It would happen in 2 days, on Friday night, when intelligence indicated the next smuggling convoy was scheduled to arrive. Back in the Est region, Major Sankara and his team finalized their operational plan. They would move in 3 coordinated waves. First, securing the border crossings to prevent escape. Second, surrounding and securing the mining site itself. And third, arresting the corrupt officials simultaneously in Fadan Gourma and Ouagadougou to prevent them from destroying evidence or fleeing. Captain Zongo was assigned to lead the team that would secure the actual mining site. It was a responsibility he felt acutely. At 29 years old, he was one of the youngest officers to be given such a critical role in a presidential operation. On Thursday night, unable to sleep, he walked the perimeter of their temporary base. The stars were brilliant in the desert sky, unpolluted by city lights. He thought about what this operation meant, not just as a military action, but as a statement about what kind of country Burkina Faso wanted to be. He had grown up hearing stories of how colonial powers had extracted Africa's resources for centuries. Gold, diamonds, uranium, all flowing out of the continent while poverty remained entrenched. President Traoré spoke often about breaking that cycle, about keeping African resources in African hands. This operation was a test of whether those words could translate into action. Major Sankara found him on his walk and joined him in contemplative silence for a moment before speaking. "Tomorrow will be significant, Captain, not just for us, but for the country." Captain Zongo nodded. "I understand, sir. We are ready." "I know you are," Sankara replied. "Remember, our goal is not violence but justice. We secure the site, we make arrests, and we protect the evidence. If we can achieve those objectives without firing a single shot, we will have succeeded completely." Chapter 6. The Night Operation. Friday arrived with the usual brilliant sunshine, but for Major Sankara's team, the real action would begin after dark. Final equipment checks were conducted, communications protocols reviewed, and each team member briefed on their specific responsibilities. By sunset, everyone was in position. President Traoré at the Presidential Palace in Ouagadougou had cleared his evening schedule to monitor the operation in real time from the Situation Room. With him were Colonel Diarra, the Minister of Defense, and key military commanders. Multiple screens showed encrypted video feeds from the teams in the field. At 2300 hours, Major Sankara's voice came through clearly on the secure channel. "All units in position. Border crossing secure. No hostile contacts. Awaiting final authorization." President Traoré leaned forward to the microphone. "Authorization granted. Execute the operation. Remember, our objective is apprehension, not confrontation. Proceed with caution." "Understood, Mr. President. Beginning approach now." In the darkness, Captain Zongo led his team toward the mining site. They moved silently, using night vision equipment and hand signals to coordinate. The moon was a thin crescent, providing just enough light to navigate but not enough to be easily spotted. As they approached, they could see the glow of work lights at the mining site. The foreign miners were in the middle of their operation, completely unaware of the net closing around them. Captain Zongo signaled his teams to surround the perimeter completely before making their presence known. At precisely midnight, powerful spotlights illuminated the entire site, and loudspeakers announced in French and English, "This is the Burkina Faso Armed Forces. You are engaged in illegal mining operations on sovereign territory. Lay down your tools and place your hands where we can see them. Do not attempt to flee. Cooperation will be noted in your prosecution." The reaction was immediate chaos. Some miners dropped to their knees immediately, hands raised. Others attempted to run, but found themselves facing armed soldiers at every exit point. Within 10 minutes, 17 foreign nationals and 3 Burkinabe accomplices were in custody, without a single shot fired. At the same moment, in Fadan Gourma and Ouagadougou, police units executed arrest warrants for the corrupt mining officials. Evidence was seized from their offices and homes, bank records, communication logs, and documents detailing the bribes they had received. In Niamey, Niger's security forces detained the individuals who had been operating the smuggling route, seizing 2 vehicles loaded with equipment bound for the mining site. By 2 in the morning, Major Sankara was able to report to President Traoré, "Mr. President, operation complete. All primary targets in custody. Mining site secured. Evidence inventory in progress. 0 casualties on all sides." In the Situation Room, there was a moment of collective relief and satisfaction. President Traoré's expression remained serious, but there was a glint of approval in his eyes. "Excellent work, Major. Secure the site and prepare for the geological assessment team. I want to know exactly what we have discovered and what it is worth." He turned to the others in the room. "This is only the beginning. We have stopped this operation, but our work is not complete until we have prosecuted those responsible, recovered what was stolen, and implemented measures to prevent this from happening again. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue bringing you more content like this. Chapter 7. The Evidence. Saturday morning brought new revelations. The geological assessment team, led by Amadou Diallo, whose initial discovery had started everything, arrived at the secured site with sophisticated equipment. What they found exceeded even the most optimistic estimates. The emerald deposit extended over an area of approximately 2 square kilometers, with concentrations of gem-quality stones that rivaled some of the best-known deposits in Colombia and Zambia. Based on preliminary surveys, the site could potentially yield emeralds worth between $50 and $70 million over a 5-year extraction period, if properly managed. The illegal operation had extracted roughly 8% of the easily accessible surface deposits, approximately $5 to $6 million worth of emeralds. But the discovery of the full extent of the deposit meant that Burkina Faso had not only stopped a theft, but had also discovered a significant national asset. President Traoré arrived in Fadangourma that afternoon via military helicopter. It was a calculated decision to visit the region personally. He wanted to send a clear message about the government's commitment to protecting national resources and to thank the personnel involved in the operation. At the regional command center, he met with Major Sankara, Captain Zongo, and the other key personnel. His praise was genuine and specific, recognizing individual contributions and the professionalism with which the operation had been conducted. But it was his speech to the assembled personnel that would be remembered most. Standing in the courtyard of the command center, with officers and enlisted personnel gathered around, he spoke without notes, his words carrying the weight of conviction. "What you accomplished yesterday was more than a successful military operation. You defended our sovereignty. You protected our people's resources. You upheld the principle that Burkina Faso's wealth belongs to Burkinabés, not to foreign corporations or corrupt intermediaries." He paused, looking at the faces before him. "For too long, Africa's resources have been extracted by others while our people remained poor. This happens not because we lack valuable resources. We have gold, we have uranium, we have manganese, and now we know we have emeralds. It happens because of corruption, because of weak institutions, because of a colonial mentality that says foreign ownership is somehow more legitimate than African ownership." His voice grew stronger. "That mentality ends here. In Burkina Faso, under this government, our resources will be developed for the benefit of our people. We will welcome legitimate investment, but we will not tolerate theft. We will work with international partners, but we will not surrender our sovereignty." The assembled personnel responded with vigorous applause. These were soldiers and officers who had chosen to serve their country despite modest pay and difficult conditions. To hear their president articulate a vision of national dignity and economic independence resonated deeply. Later that day, President Traoré visited the mining site itself with Amadou Diallo as his guide. They walked the perimeter as Amadou explained the geological formations and the potential of the deposit. Traoré asked detailed questions, demonstrating his background in geology, the field he had studied at university before joining the military. Looking out over the site, with the savannah stretching endlessly toward the horizon, Traoré made a decision. "This deposit will be developed by our national mining company. We will bring in technical expertise where needed, but ownership and management will remain with Burkina Faso. The revenues will go into a sovereign wealth fund dedicated to education, healthcare, and infrastructure, for this region specifically." He turned to Amadou. "Mr. Diallo, Your discovery could transform this entire region. Because of your diligence and integrity, thousands of people in the Est region will benefit. The government will recognize your contribution formally, but I wanted to thank you personally. Amadou, overwhelmed by the moment, could only nod his appreciation. Like most Burkinabés, he had lived through years of instability and corruption. To see a president who actually seemed to care about putting resources to work for the people felt revolutionary. Soifi Sunere, Chapter 8, International Complications. While the operation in Burkina Faso had been a success, the international dimensions were just beginning to unfold. The foreign nationals arrested at the mining site included citizens of Belgium, South Africa, and Lebanon. Their respective embassies were demanding consular access and protesting what they characterized as harsh treatment. The most significant pressure came from Belgium, where several influential businessmen had invested in the mining syndicate. The Belgian Foreign Ministry formally requested a meeting with Burkina Faso's ambassador to Belgium to discuss what they termed the situation of Belgian citizens detained in Burkina Faso. President Traoré anticipated this pressure and was prepared for it. He instructed his foreign minister to issue a statement, making Burkina Faso's position crystal clear. The detained foreign nationals were arrested for committing serious crimes on Burkinabe territory, including theft of national resources, corruption of public officials, and operating without proper licensing. They would be prosecuted under Burkina Faso law, with full respect for their rights to legal representation and consular access, but there would be no special treatment based on nationality. The statement continued with a sharper edge. Burkina Faso expects its international partners to respect our sovereignty and our right to prosecute crimes committed within our borders. We would expect the same respect from our African partners if the situation were reversed, and we certainly expect it from our European partners who often lecture us about the importance of the rule of law. This statement generated significant international media attention. News outlets began covering the story, not just as a criminal case, but as an example of a new generation of African leadership asserting sovereignty over natural resources. Comparisons were drawn to President Traoré's previous actions, nationalizing gold mines and establishing state control over mineral exports. Not all the attention was positive. Some international business publications criticized what they called Traoré's resource nationalism, warning that such policies would discourage foreign investment. An editorial in a major financial newspaper argued that developing countries needed foreign capital and expertise to develop their mineral resources, and that Traoré's approach was short-sighted. But these criticisms were countered by others, including several prominent African economists and policy analysts who pointed out that Burkina Faso wasn't rejecting foreign investment. It was rejecting illegal operations and asserting reasonable control over its own resources. The distinction mattered greatly. Professor Aminata Touré, a Senegalese economist at the University of Dakar, wrote an op-ed that gained wide circulation. President Traoré is not being radical, he is being rational. For decades, Africa has signed contracts that gave away mineral rights for pennies, while foreign companies made billions. Burkina Faso is simply insisting that its resources be developed legally, transparently, and for the benefit of its citizens. This should not be controversial. Within Burkina Faso, public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. News of the emerald discovery and the arrest of the illegal miners spread quickly through social media and local radio stations. In Ouagadougou, spontaneous demonstrations of support for the president broke out in several neighborhoods. Young people especially embraced the narrative of standing up to foreign exploitation. Abdoulaye Sawadogo, a university student in Ouagadougou studying economics, expressed a sentiment shared by many of his generation. For so long, we have felt powerless watching our resources leave the country while we remain poor. President Traoré is showing us that we don't have to accept this. We can control our own destiny. This popular support gave President Traoré political capital to resist international pressure. In a meeting with his cabinet, he addressed the criticism directly. Some say we are discouraging investment. I say we are discouraging theft. There is a difference. Legitimate investors who respect our laws, pay fair taxes, and contribute to our development are welcome. Criminals who seek to steal from us are not. It is that simple. Chapter 9. The Trial. 6 weeks after their arrest, the foreign nationals and their Burkinabe accomplices went on trial in Ouagadougou. The proceedings were held in the capital's main courthouse, a colonial-era building that had seen its share of historic trials over the decades. The trial attracted significant media attention, both domestically and internationally. President Traoré made a point of not commenting on the case once proceedings began, respecting the independence of the judiciary, but his Minister of Justice ensured that the prosecution had the resources and support needed to present a thorough case. The evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors presented detailed documentation of the illegal mining operation, including photographs, geological surveys, financial records showing the bribes paid to corrupt officials, and testimony from Major Sankara and Captain Zongo about what they had observed during surveillance. Perhaps most damning was the testimony of 2 of the Burkinabe accomplices who had negotiated plea agreements in exchange for cooperation. They described in detail how the operation was planned, how equipment was smuggled across the border, and how the corrupt mining officials were recruited and paid. The defense strategy primarily focused on arguing that the defendants had believed they were operating legally, that they had been assured by their Burkinabe contacts that all necessary permissions had been obtained. It was a weak argument given the evidence of nighttime operations, border smuggling, and obvious efforts at concealment. The Belgian defendants, in particular, seemed to struggle with the reality that they were being prosecuted seriously by an African court. Their lawyers, some of whom had flown in from Europe, initially appeared to believe that diplomatic pressure would result in dismissed charges or token penalties. That assumption proved badly misplaced. The judge, Madame Sophie Ilbudo, was a veteran of the Burkina Faso judiciary, known for her meticulous attention to legal procedure and her immunity to external pressure. She had been carefully selected for this case precisely because of her reputation for independence. During the trial, one particularly memorable exchange occurred when the lead Belgian defendant's lawyer attempted to argue that his client's technical expertise justified some leniency. "Your Honor," the lawyer argued, "my client is a trained geologist with decades of experience. He believed he was helping develop Burkina Faso's resources." Judge Ilbudo looked up from the documents before her, her expression unchanged. "Counselor, the legal question before this court is not whether your client is skilled at his profession. The question is whether he engaged in systematic theft of national resources, bribery of public officials, and organized smuggling. His professional qualifications are noted, but do not constitute a defense against criminal charges." The exchange, captured by journalists present in the courtroom, became widely shared on social media, seen as emblematic of a new era where foreign nationals could not expect special treatment in African courts simply because of their nationality or professional status. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution was methodical and thorough, addressing each charge with detailed evidence. The defense put up what resistance it could, but was clearly overmatched by the facts of the case. When the verdict came, it was decisive. All defendants were found guilty on multiple charges. The foreign nationals received sentences ranging from 5 to 8 years in prison, along with substantial fines. The corrupt Burkinabe officials received slightly longer sentences, as their betrayal of public trust was considered an aggravating factor. Perhaps more significantly, the court ordered the confiscation of all assets connected to the illegal operation and ordered the defendants to pay restitution to Burkina Faso for the estimated value of the emeralds they had stolen. Chapter 10. Recovery and Development. While the trial was underway, President Traoré had been working on the next phase of his plan, properly developing the emerald deposit for the benefit of Burkina Faso's people. He established a special committee within the national mining company, SOPAMIRBI, to oversee the development of what was now being called the Palmer Emerald Project. The committee included government representatives, independent geologists, financial experts, and critically, representatives from the local community. This last element was particularly important to Traoré, who wanted to ensure that the people of the Est region would directly benefit from the resources being extracted from their land. In a meeting with the committee, Traoré outlined his vision. This project must be different from typical mining operations. Yes, we need to extract and sell the emeralds to generate revenue, but we must do so sustainably, transparently, and with genuine benefit to the local population. He continued, laying out specific requirements. 10% of all revenues would go directly to a community development fund controlled by elected representatives from Pama and surrounding villages. Another 20% would be allocated to the regional government for infrastructure improvements. The remaining 70% would go to the national treasury, with specific allocations for education and healthcare. Additionally, the mining operation would prioritize hiring and training local workers. A technical training center would be established in Pama to teach mining skills, gemology, and related professions. Traoré was adamant that Burkinabés should not just be manual laborers, but should develop expertise in all aspects of gemstone mining and processing. Environmental protection was another key priority. The committee included environmental specialists who would monitor the operation's impact and ensure proper reclamation of mined areas. Given the region's fragile ecosystem, this was particularly important. Amadou Diallo was appointed as the chief geologist for the project, a recognition of both his initial discovery and his demonstrated integrity. It was a significant promotion for him, but he approached the responsibility with characteristic humility and dedication. 3 months after the verdict in the criminal trial, the Pama Emerald Project officially began operations. The opening ceremony was attended by President Traoré, regional leaders, and hundreds of residents from Pama and nearby communities. In his speech at the ceremony, Traoré struck a balance between celebration and realism. Today marks the beginning of something important for Burkina Faso, and especially for this region. But let me be clear about what this means and what it does not mean. This project will generate revenue and create jobs. It will fund schools and clinics and roads. These are real benefits that will improve real lives. He paused, looking out at the crowd. But this is not magic. This will not instantly solve all our problems. Mining is difficult work. It requires skill, discipline, and patience. The benefits will come gradually, over years, not overnight. What matters is that those benefits will go to our people, not to foreign corporations. What matters is that we are building something sustainable that will serve this community for years to come. The crowd's response was enthusiastic. For people in one of Burkina Faso's poorest regions, the project represented hope, not false promises of instant wealth, but genuine opportunity for gradual improvement. Chapter 11, Challenges and Setbacks. Despite the careful planning and genuine commitment to making the Pama Emerald Project succeed, implementation proved challenging. Reality, as always, was more complicated than plans on paper. The first major challenge came from an unexpected source: resistance from traditional authorities in the region. The local chief of Pama, Chief Amadou Boukari, felt that he had not been adequately consulted in the project's planning. In the traditional hierarchy, he believed that as the custodian of the land, he should have been approached first and given a more prominent role in decision-making. This created tension that threatened to undermine community support for the project. Some villagers, caught between their respect for traditional authority and their desire for the economic benefits the project promised, became conflicted and uncertain. President Traoré, when informed of this situation, recognized it as a failure in the implementation process. "We cannot impose development on people," he told his team during an emergency meeting. "We must work with existing social structures, not against them." He personally traveled to Pama and requested a meeting with Chief Boukari. The meeting took place in the chief's compound, following traditional protocols. Traoré came not with a large entourage, but with just 2 advisors, demonstrating respect for the traditional setting. Chief Boukari, a man in his 70s who had led his community for 4 decades, spoke frankly. "Mr. President, we appreciate what you are trying to do, but this is our land, the land of our ancestors. For centuries, we have managed this land according to our customs. Now suddenly there are plans and projects and committees, and we are told we should be grateful." Traoré listened carefully, then responded with equal frankness. "Chief Boukari, you are right. We moved too quickly and did not show proper respect for traditional authority. That was a mistake, and I apologize for it. But let me also be clear, these emeralds belong to all of Burkina Faso, not just to one community or region. Our responsibility is to develop them for the benefit of all our people while respecting local rights and traditions." The conversation continued for several hours, with both men seeking common ground. Eventually, they reached an agreement, The project would proceed, but with formal recognition of the traditional authorities' role in community consultation. Chief Bukari would be given a seat on the Community Oversight Committee, and traditional ceremonies would be performed to bless the mining operations according to local custom. This compromise satisfied most parties, though some of Traoré's more progressive advisors felt he had conceded too much to traditional structures. But Traoré was pragmatic. Development that divides a community is not real development, he explained. We need social cohesion as much as we need economic growth. The second major challenge was technical. The emerald deposit, while rich, was geologically complex. Extraction required more sophisticated equipment and expertise than initially anticipated. The project fell behind schedule, and costs began to exceed the budget. Some critics used these setbacks to question the entire approach. Why not bring in experienced foreign mining companies with proven track records? Why insist on national control if it meant inefficiency and delays? President Traoré addressed these criticisms in a radio interview that reached audiences across West Africa. Yes, we are learning as we go. Yes, we are making mistakes. But that is how capacity is built. If we always outsource technical challenges to foreign companies because they know better, then we will never develop our own expertise. Our children and grandchildren will still be dependent on foreign technicians to extract their own resources. He acknowledged the costs, but defended the approach. Every country that successfully developed its own capacity went through this phase. We are investing in learning, in building skills, in creating institutions. This has value beyond the immediate project. Despite the challenges, progress continued. By the end of the first year of operations, the Pama Emerald Project had extracted and sold emeralds worth approximately $3 million. It was below the initial projections, but still substantial. More importantly, 87 local workers had been hired and trained, and the Technical Training Center had enrolled its first class of students. Chapter 12, Legacy and Lessons. 2 years after the initial discovery, the impact of the Pama Emerald Project was becoming visible in the Est region. The Community Development Fund had financed the construction of 3 new schools, renovation of the health clinic in Pama, and improvement of the road connecting Pama to Fada Ngurma. Perhaps more significant than these physical improvements was the change in mindset. Young people in the region now had options they hadn't had before. Some were training as geologists and mining technicians. Others were developing businesses to serve the mining operation, providing food services, transportation, and equipment maintenance. Amadou Diallo, now respected as the chief geologist of a significant national project, reflected on the journey. When I first discovered those emeralds, I thought I had found a valuable mineral deposit, but what we actually discovered was possibility, the possibility that Burkina Faso could control its own resources and develop them for its own benefit. For President Traoré, the Pama Emerald situation had become a case study in his broader vision for Burkina Faso's development. In speeches and interviews, he often referenced it as an example of what was possible when sovereignty was defended and resources were managed in the national interest. In an address to the United Nations General Assembly, he spoke about the broader lessons. The theft we stopped at Pama happens every day across Africa, sometimes legally because of exploitative contracts signed decades ago, sometimes illegally through corruption and smuggling. The amount of wealth that flows out of Africa while our people remain poor is staggering. This must change, he continued, but change requires more than just speeches and slogans. It requires institutions that can enforce laws, courts that cannot be corrupted or intimidated, security forces that protect national interests, and leaders who are willing to take principled stands even when faced with international pressure. The international business community remained skeptical of Traoré's approach. Investment analysts continued to rate Burkina Faso as a challenging environment for foreign investment, but Traoré had concluded that this reputation, while economically costly in some respects, actually served a useful purpose. It discouraged extractive investors seeking easy profits while attracting those genuinely interested in long-term, mutually beneficial partnerships. For Captain Zongo, who had led the team that secured the mining site that crucial night, the operation remained the defining moment of his military career. He had since been promoted to major and was training the next generation of officers. When teaching about leadership and decision-making, he often returned to the lessons of that operation. "We were asked to defend our country's sovereignty," he would tell his students, "not with grand gestures or dramatic battles, but with professionalism, precision and respect for law." That night, we showed that Burkina Faso's armed forces could execute complex operations successfully. But more importantly, we showed that our military serves the people's interests, not private interests or foreign interests. For the people of Burkina Faso, particularly the younger generation, President Traoré's handling of the emerald theft became symbolic of a new era. Whether his broader vision for the country would succeed remained to be seen. The challenges of development, security, and governance were enormous and ongoing. But in this one case, at least, sovereignty had been defended, justice had been served, and resources were being developed for national benefit. In Palma, where it all began, life continued its daily rhythms. Children walked to schools built with emerald revenues. Sick people received treatment at an improved health clinic. The road that had once been nearly impassable was now maintained regularly. These were modest improvements, not transformative miracles, but they were real and they were built on resources that belonged to the community. Amadou Diallo, on one of his regular site inspections, stood at the edge of the mine and looked out over the savannah. The landscape hadn't changed dramatically, but the possibilities it represented had. In the distance, he could see dust rising from the road. Another transport truck heading to Fadengurma with emeralds that would be processed, certified, and sold through official channels, with revenues tracked and allocated according to law. It wasn't perfect. There were still inefficiencies, still disagreements about priorities, still challenges to overcome. But it was legitimate, it was transparent, and it was serving the interests of Burkinabe people. For Amadou, remembering the tire tracks he had seen that first evening, evidence of theft happening in darkness, the contrast was profound. President Traoré had shown that it was possible to stand up to exploitation, to assert sovereignty, and to develop resources for national benefit. The Palma emeralds, once nearly lost to foreign theft, were now contributing to the development of the region and the country. It was one success among many challenges, but it was a success that mattered. In the end, the story of the Palma emeralds was about more than minerals or money. It was about dignity, about the right of a people to control their own resources and their own future. It was about the principle that Africa's wealth should serve Africa's people. And it was about leadership willing to turn those principles into action, even when difficult and even when facing opposition. As Ibrahim Traoré had said at the beginning of this journey, sovereignty is not negotiable. The Palma emeralds proved he meant it. The end.